get to know like the principal, whether it's the leader of the place where they volunteer, but really get to know the teachers or whoever can write strongly and deeply about the students' commitment and their special talents.
And to add to that, so in addition, yes, the letters of recommendation are very important because it gives us a perspective of you that you might not be able to express yourself within your own essays or within just your application in general. So that is really important. In addition to that, we like to see that you are involved. Those extracurricular pieces are super important. I know a number of applicants that have 2,200 SATs and 4.0s and the most rigor they can have, but they don't do anything. And because they don't do anything, they don't know the teachers that well, maybe they're not going to have great recs. And we won't admit them to Emory because they aren't, what are they going to add to our campus? We don't know. And so that's why it's really important that you get involved and that you're committed. And really shoot for those leadership positions, especially if you want to get a scholarship. If you can have multiple leadership positions, take initiative, create projects, that's what we like to see. In addition to that, we will look at your test scores, and we have averages that you can see on our website. And we look at your essays. And really with your essays, that's your time to share your own voice and to really have a one-on-one interview with an admissions counselor. So what I always tell people is to write what they're passionate about and don't write what you think we want to hear as admissions counselors. So all those criteria put together is how we make a decision on you as an applicant.
Emily, would you like to add?
Yeah, can I just add one thing on top of that? I think when you hear something like that that says, we want you to have these leadership positions and go out and do all these different things. I think when I was in high school, I felt pressure to do every single thing. So to be president of every club and to then be a really great athlete and to also be involved in my community at church and to get great grades. And so what I counsel people on is to pick the things that they're really passionate about. Don't just go with a checklist mentality and say, I'm going to go be the president of 4 different clubs just to check the box and say I was president of a club. Really think about, what is it that you love to do? And if, for example, that happens to be playing the guitar, then maybe you would try to be president or be involved in a musical organization. And maybe then you could be involved as head of community service. And so I just encourage, students to think about what they care about, because that's going to tell the school who you are, and it's going to tell the school much more about what you're going to bring to campus.
Well, then, I was going to go next back to you, Emily and Rodney, as well. Both of you guys having been graduates of Ivy League schools, and definitely, my parents were like, you go to Harvard or just get out of town. But they didn't kick me out because I went to Rice. But you guys went to Ivy Leagues. You guys have interviewed students subsequently for your Ivy League schools. In interviewing, what are the types of qualities that your schools might be looking for?
Yeah, Princeton is similar to Emory in the way we look at when we do the interviews. We interview in Georgia, the state of Georgia, we interview every single student who applies. It doesn't matter where you are in Georgia. We'll do it by phone. We try to do as many of them in person as possible. It's kind of a two-way street in the sense that we want to get to know you, but we also want you to get to know us. We're marketing Princeton at the same time. And we as volunteers want to show you that we really care about the experience we had there. We want to convey that to you as well. So please come in. If you're going to do an interview with any of these schools, you better do some research on the school. Know the school. It's almost like a job application. You don't go apply to a corporation and not know anything about it. And I've interviewed students who appear really bright, but they don't appear to have any knowledge of Princeton. And it's like, in this day and age with the internet, you should know quite a bit ahead of time. And you should be able to ask me intelligent questions about my experience too. I mean, we like to talk about ourselves. So that's also, it's not just about you, but we want to hear, what sort of thought process you go through in terms of what you want out of college. It's not just, like she said, it's not just a checklist. I'm looking for a spark. When I'm talking to somebody, I want them to really care about what they're talking about. I don't, sometimes you can just feel like they aren't going through a checklist in their brain of what to say and what not to say, and that's just a really boring interview. And I interview people, I work at the agency, I interview people all the time, so I can, sometimes some of these kids are so fascinating, I'll talk to them for over an hour. I'm supposed to only talk to them for like 45 minutes, but I try to give everybody at least 45 minutes when I'm interviewing them, because that's out of fairness, but sometimes that's a stretch with kids.
is there I'm sorry, I interrupted you, but I'm used to doing that of your wife. Honey, is there, can you tell a story of somebody you interviewed in the past couple of years, maybe hopefully someone that might be Asian American that really struck you and what it was? Because you told me about somebody. I'm sorry, Emily, you...
Maybe I can turn the question a little bit to something that when I was preparing, maybe I'll tell a story about myself. When I was preparing for my Harvard Business School interviews, I think one of the best pieces of advice I got was, well, let me back up. I think sometimes if you come from a community that's different than the community that you're going into, you can worry whether or not that's going to be held against you. And so I was really curious, how can I take ownership of my identity as an Asian American female? How can I use that to my advantage in my interviews? And one of the best pieces of advice that I got was to understand the stereotypes people are going to have of you, and then own them. Turn it right back around on the interviewer. So if someone comes in and is going to think, oh, here's a quiet, shy, Asian American female who's really good at math and really likes to study, work hard by herself, I'm going to come in and I'm going to stand up straight, and I'm going to look them in the eye, I'm going to give them a firm handshake, and I'm going to be articulate and confident. And that's going to surprise them. And I think when you think about what interviewers are looking for, I love what Rodney said about someone with a spark, someone who's really interesting. Because Stephanie said they did 17,500 applications. Can you imagine reading all of those? In order to stand out, you have to be someone who's really interesting and has an authentic voice. And so in interviews, I would say letting that shine out is going to give you your best edge.
Yeah, I mean, it's anecdotes, it's stories. I mean, if it's an immigrant experience, those are often really interesting stories about your parents. I love to hear interesting stories about people who had to struggle, people with single moms, I mean, who've managed to overcome them. But, they have to give me the story. Sometimes they just don't. They may have a good story there, they don't tell me, and I may miss out. So you just have to be ready with sort of 3 or 4 good points that you want to bring up during the interview. Whether I ask the question or not, there's always that opportunity for you to sell yourself. And that's sometimes awkward for anybody, and Asian Americans, we're supposed to be humble and don't brag. But ultimately, you're in there to brag. You've got to brag. This is your opportunity, and this is, you're not going to be able to, Princeton, you can't go to the admissions officer up in Princeton and talk and interview them. That's what we're the surrogates. We're going to write little notes and give it to them, and hopefully that will supplement the application. Because, essays are important, but, who knows how much of it was written by you, really. But when you talk to a person, they can't hide that. It's who they are.
Jennifer, do you have anything to add, being a parent of 2 kids that successfully are currently attending Ivy Leagues?
I think what resonated with me was having a passion. Both of my children have very unique passions. My son writes classical music and did this on his own. He was self-taught and didn't actually begin to love that until he was 13 or 14 years old. That consumed his life over the past 4 or 5 years, from middle school to high school. My daughter played soccer and went down to Bolivia in the summer times and lived with families, and starting at the age of 14, she went down there on her own. And that really it came through on their applications, on their essays, that dedication that they had. So I think that is what I would add, is that passion really does come through.
Well, I touched upon this in the beginning, and this is not to say grades aren't important. You got to get really good grades. But again, in this competitive market, in this day and age, for many schools, especially the top schools, grades are not enough. But one controversy that's been going around actually recently is whether it helps or it hurts to be Asian American. Is it helpful to be diverse? Is it helpful to be Asian American? I read an article recently that said certain Asian kids don't even check the box that they're Asian because of this problem of Asian kids are compared to other Asian kids, and then they have to have higher scores, higher grades. Do any of the panelists have thoughts on that or perspectives?
I can tell another just personal story. about what I did and how I handled that situation. So I had heard the same thing, and here's another example where I think you can be really smart and thoughtful about the schools that you're applying to. Again, keep in mind, this is kind of my personal perspective from having applied to schools, and so I don't work for the admissions of these schools, and I'm not sure that there's any truth in kind of some of the suspicions that we have about how this works for or against us. But I will say that, when I was applying to undergrads, for my application to Stanford, I did not check any sort of race box. I think I checked prefer not to disclose or something like that. But when I was applying to Duke and some of the other schools in the South, I did. And my theory, whether right or wrong, was that some of the schools in the South are looking for diversity, and I thought that would be a real asset and a differentiating factor in my application. And I thought that on the West Coast, I really wouldn't be adding that much of diversity, and I prefer just not to even go there. And I don't know if that's a strategy I would advocate, but what I would advocate is being thoughtful about the schools you're applying to, and thinking about how your unique story can differentiate you from the typical people who are applying there.
I'll say, speaking for Kennesaw, and then I have something to add. I actually wrote a paper on that about 10 years ago. Published in a nothing publication. But, basically, at Kennesaw, we are looking for diversity. So for us, we are happy to accept anyone. We actually have an extremely diverse campus. Over 120 countries are represented on the campus right now. And it's an Asian Americans and just South Korea, I think, is the largest student population we have out of, if you were to take the separate countries, South Korea is the largest student population we have currently. But generally, honestly, we don't even look at race when we are going through the applications. We're looking at your grades, your extracurriculars, and that's it. Working in the international admissions office, obviously everybody's application I look at is going to be different. So everything. But the paper I wrote about 10 years ago was on affirmative action. And one of the, was the affirmative action problem, or, that whole debate was in a high rise. And one of my very interesting findings that I found was that, of course, the debate was that, the African American population was the beneficiary of it, and the Caucasian community was not. But what I found was that the Asian community was actually held to a higher standard than the Caucasian community, and then the African American and Hispanic communities were held at the same standards, but they were receiving more of the benefits of it. So I think it is something that happens, certainly. Again, this was 10 years ago that I did that research, so those are very, very old statistics, but it's a mentality, and it's not necessarily a correct or good mentality, but it's, if anything, I think it could work in your favor and could be good. But yeah, it's there.
And piggyback off of that, yeah, I think it is a mentality to hold the Asian American individual at a higher standard, but just as much as if you are a strong applicant, we don't look at race and we don't try to fill any of those quotas when it comes to that. So if you are a strong applicant, you're going to get into Emory. Now, as a multicultural representative in the admissions office, currently our Asian American population at Emory is about 33% of the population. So it's actually in our office not considered a minority. And we get a lot of applications from Asian Americans. So you are unique in that you are coming from a different background, but it's not considered as much of a minority as a Hispanic or an African American student that serve about 6% Hispanic and 8% African American in our population. So there's a drastic difference in percentage, and that's what we consider a minority as opposed to the 33% that we have represented at Emory. Now, I don't say that to discourage you, I just say that that's just the reality of Emory, and it's a good point that Emily brought up to make sure you're very cognizant of what, or just very aware of what schools you're applying to and what you do with those applications when you're applying to them. So, like I said before, if you're a strong applicant, you should be able to get in, and it doesn't matter exactly where, it doesn't matter geographically or your race or whatnot. If you've worked hard, you should be able to get into Emory.
But you know what? I cannot help myself. I want to delve a little more into, we touched upon some of the stereotypes. And in a room full of Asians, I'm going to say it. Sometimes they're true, okay, about Asian applicants. Principal Brandon left, but I met with him at Northview High School, and he was talking about, for instance, that not that many Asian American kids are involved in athletics. And that is one way you can get a scholarship. Again, don't play football if you don't like it. But that's not even a stereotype, but again, in some of these qualitative studies that they've shown, you know, especially with the elite schools, because that's usually where they focus on, they'll say, oh, you know, Asian students aren't well-rounded enough, you know, they focus just too much on grades. You know, again, the principal Brandon was saying most of the Asian kids, they focus kind of in the arts, and there's nothing wrong with that. So, you know, is there a, I know none of you guys have to speak on behalf of your university officially, but just from your experience, I mean, do you think there is kind of a bias against Asian American kids as they apply that can hurt them, or is it true?
I personally don't think anything is, I've never felt anything was hurtful in that way. That certainly, if anything, the so-called stereotypes have been beneficial in consideration a lot of the time, because a lot of the time Asian Americans and Asian students in general are seen as more responsible, and that certainly sways more in the favor. But you know, it's just something that I certainly haven't seen it.
Like you said, stereotypes can be true based off truth, and then on the opposite end too, Emily down here is saying owning those and proving otherwise. So I think it's kind of a mixture of the two. I think life shouldn't be lived in the extremes in any way, but if you are a highly intelligent person who's not super involved but has maybe one thing that you're passionate about, commit to that. Don't feel like you have to spread thin. Maybe you are shy, that's okay. These are good things, but because you're shy doesn't mean you can't be confident in yourself and portray yourself as confident in front of people. So yes, I think that, you know, when I'm looking at application and I open up and I see it's an Asian American, I'm like, I tend to think this is based off me. I'm like, that the scores will be higher for testing, for example, compared to a Hispanic student, an African American student, just based across the board generalizations. So you do have that bias, but that's not going to affect the admissions in any means. If anything, I think that the Asian American community is looked at with a lot of respect, and the stereotypes are good for you guys, so that's a good thing. But really just try to be true to who you are in the whole process, and I think that's what's most important while you're looking at colleges and getting prepared for that.
Emily, and then
Jennifer
Jared.
as well. I think we could have a really long debate, and it would probably just remain a debate. I don't know if you'd ever be able to get to an answer about whether or not there is a real bias that is affecting Asian Americans. And so I would almost advocate to put a question like that aside and say, you know, what are you going to do? If there is a bias, what are you going to do about it? How are you going to differentiate yourself? How are you going to own whatever stereotypes people, you know, you may encounter? And that's something that goes for life, kind of outside of the admissions process for school. And this is the point where I think it becomes really important to go back to what Jennifer said, you know, her prior comment about doing something you're passionate about. And so as someone who was an Asian stereotype, I was very shy. I was very good at physics and calculus, and I became an engineer. And so as someone who came from that background, I had to push myself, both to go after the things I was passionate about, because let's face it, I was very passionate about physics. I loved it. That served me well in my academic background. But I had to look for experiences that were also going to take me outside of my comfort zone. And so I had to do things like join a sorority in college. And I had to do things like learn how to speak another language and try to expand my horizons about who I thought I could be. And I think that kind of self-awareness, that kind of ability to challenge yourself beyond whatever you may be comfortable at or whatever you may be good at, is going to set you apart.
So this has nothing to do with college, but it has to do with the years before college. I would suggest that there is a bias. And I was just speaking with a teacher the other night saying that I was going to be coming here. We were going to be talking about English language learners in the Asian community, and she said, oh, I don't worry about my Asian kids. And so that is a bias, because if a child is struggling, and this was at the elementary level, if a child is struggling, it's very easy, if you do have that bias, to overlook the needs of that child. So I would suggest that what many believe is a positive bias is actually negatively affecting a lot of our students.
Aaron, you had
I just want to chime in and throw some completely diabolically opposite point of view in certain aspects, and that is the timing of these issues. Right now, the emerging markets are in Asia, and it's such a magical draw that if you wanted it, you can definitely capitalize on it. A couple other situations, for instance, Kennesaw State is now focusing heavily on athletics, is about to start a football team next year. So imagine if you were a football player and you did not have the so-called AA grades, but the market timing would be perfect, right? If you were a good sports person, a good athlete, a good football player, you'd definitely make it way up on the pile. So, there are those things that you need to focus on. For example, the Korean businesses that have just come into, including Kia to Georgia, that has a lot to say in terms of economic power, and that sets a standard, and you become an ambassador for that part of the region in the world, and you need to capitalize on that. It's okay to be Asian, and it's more important to be Asian American and a good Asian American. I think that's absolutely okay to do.
And I want to say again, I think everybody got a little note card, and if not, Gloria is over there, and we have Sherry over here. Feel free at any time to write a question, and they'll bring it up to me. So just wanted to remind people. So let me actually ask this of Donna and Vera and to anyone else. Okay, so beyond what we might think is a bias, and everybody knows grades are important, what other things can help? Can you talk about them? We talked about.
Well, I mentioned already about the importance of recommendation letters and just really making strong connections with people who know you, who can speak highly about you as an individual. And I think just echoing what people have already said was to find something that you're passionate about and to follow that and really be able to speak to that. And I think one of the things that Asian Americans are often stereotyped as being quiet and shy, and I think some of the classes or some of the skills that students can work on are to take theater classes or to take the public speaking classes or get involved with really being a leader too, so you can accentuate those verbal skills that you will need. And for example, at Emory, the class, the ratio between the faculty and students, all our classes are pretty small. And so when you go to college, you're going to be expected to participate, to be prepared, of course, to do your homework, but also to really be able to speak critically about the readings and be able to debate on ideas. And so it's really important to develop those verbal and critical thinking skills.
Quickly add to that, exactly. When we're looking at letters of recommendation, I really do like to see the teachers comment on how the student participates in class. So be vocal in class, ask questions, ask hard questions. Don't just sit there, nod your head and smile and all the whole time. You don't always have to be the one raising your hand every day all the time, but really do make yourself known in class and really try to challenge yourself to speak up, even if it's something that's really scary for you, because that's something we look for in our students at Emory. And then 2 other things just really fast about what can help you stick out as well. Is actually going to fairs and talking to admissions counselors when they come to visit you at your high schools, going and maybe missing class that one day, but talking to them is really important, because I can tell you that I really pushed for and advocated for the students that I met in my travels throughout the year, and that would email me occasionally because they were on my radar screen, and I really pushed for them and really tried to support them throughout the process. And a lot of them were successful, and some of them maybe I couldn't push too much for, but don't be annoying and emailing the admissions counselor every day, but you can definitely reach out to them and talk to them, and I think that that really is helpful in the process as well. So that's something else that you can do when you're applying to schools.
I'll piggyback off of that statement. The whole time I'm thinking that show us that you care, basically. Show us that you care whether or not you get into the school. Like she said, don't pester us, because that's not fun. But show it. Send us an email. Show up at the office and introduce yourself. That makes a world of difference. If a student comes into my office and says hello to me and says, "Oh, I really want this," I am going to work harder for that student. If I meet them and I know that they want it, it makes a big difference than if they're just a name on a piece of paper that comes through my pile of paper. So yeah, show that you care. Speak up. And a quick tip for those shy ones out there, class participation, prepare the day before 1 question that you will certainly raise your hand and ask in class. Every day, 1 question, you'll have an excellent class participation rate.
I want to speak about 2 words that have a profound impression on my life, and I hope that it does on yours too. And this includes parents as well. The first word is engage. Engage in the communities, engage in your workspace, engage everywhere, because unless you are engaged, to direct your child to engage is fruitless. Practice what you preach. It's very important. The second word is assimilation. And having lived in this country for now over 20 some years, there is no better example than the Jewish Americans and how phenomenally they have assimilated themselves with the mainstream. And I think there are those lessons of assimilation we need to learn as Asian Americans, because unless we become ambassadors of our clan, we will just be seeking something without giving, and it doesn't work. In direct application to universities, for your essays, for instance, and just like Rodney here said that we don't know whether you wrote the essay or you had some expert help, but imagine if you were engaged, your experiences would be true life. What you would write is what you have experienced. So that becomes more truthful, more honest, and more direct. Also, when you engage, you pick up those references that you did not have because your father or your uncle wasn't an alumni of the Ivy League or the other universities you're applying to. But if you were engaged in the community, to pick up and earn that reference becomes very key, very vital, and a very sign on your application, which means you were endorsed by someone that was recognized and appreciated by the community. So I think these are some things that you really need to consider, and these are things that will not happen overnight, so you need to start now. For instance, I, from an outside perspective, have taken Kennesaw State and tied up with 3 different universities in India. Now, why did it take me and why did it not take someone else? Because I was engaged. If you look at the ratios, we may not have that much strong student population from the Asian American communities, but the faculty, there is a huge faculty from the Asian American communities teaching business courses, teaching those mathematics and everything that Emily's been talking about, because we lead that space. So again, think about these things. It's a lot to think about.
And I love that you brought up the alumni thing. Another piece that can be a plus when applying for colleges, especially the top colleges, is alumni. And that is an area, like my father went to Princeton, my uncle went to Cornell. The problem is Asian Americans as a whole have the least of those alumni connections because most of us immigrated here, recently. So what Viren mentioned about trying to connect with alumni in another way is really powerful. I'm going to ask a question from the audience. because it ties to the next question I had. But someone asked, will the ranking of a student be considered during the admission process? In other words, will you pick a student with a higher rank from an average high school over another student with a lower rank from a top high school, assuming they are at the same level for grades and scores? That's a really specific question.
At Emory, a lot of schools don't really offer rankings, so it's more just kind of a superfluous type of criteria. It's just extra. Just kind of like we don't require SAT 2s, the subject test, so it's just extra information. So really, the ranking isn't going to do as much of, it's not going to have as much of an influence. So we actually did not admit a handful of valedictorians this year, a lot of valedictorians this year, because there were other applicants that might not have been ranked first in their class, but they offered more as an applicant and as a future student at Emory. So that's an important piece for you to know, because we really, and that's stressing the whole holistic piece of we're looking for more than just a number or just a ranking.
If I may add to what you just said, parents, are you really teaching or educating your kids to grade, or are you educating your kids to be a holistic person in terms of a full-rounded, real-life person who can graduate and hit the road running? I think that is the important criteria here. If your child is challenging enough, is inspirational enough, and can stand on his ground and stand for what the person has achieved, I think there is no issue of the ranking of the background. And I'm sure Helen will have statistics on the fact that most of our kids don't make it to the Ivy League anyway. Most of them end up in the community colleges or such. Now is the rank going to matter? No. What's going to matter is how well-rounded, how real life, pragmatic, and how experienced your child is to compete in the real world.
And that's
I was going to say the short answer for Kennesaw is no, we don't look at class ranking. I've never looked at it, and I've been in the position for 5 years. I've never once looked at a class ranking.
This might be an interesting time to talk about kind of perfection, maybe head on. Thinking about like having, I think it's a 2400 now on your SATs, or having a 4.0 be number one. And I really like what Viren says about not limiting yourself to think kind of that narrowly about who you are. And when I think back about the last 10 years and the educational experiences I've had, to me, if I had been perfect through all of that, it would have meant that I wasn't pushing myself far enough. And all of the times that I've failed, all the times I've made mistakes or had to correct flaws or apologize, have actually been the times that I've grown my character. And I think that has contributed the most to my career now. And so when you think about what you're aiming for, I think of people who are perfect as very safe. And I think when a college admissions officer is looking, at who they're going to have in their community, they're actually going to want people who push the envelope a little bit. Sometimes to push the envelope, you have to be willing to fail.
All right, I want to give you a reality check for Princeton. I mean, it's, to get into, if you have a really good son or daughter who has great grades, they'll get into a good school, but it's going to be really hard to get into one specific school. Princeton has 27,000 applications. They accept 2,300, 8%. 1 in 12, which means if you took this entire room, and all of you applied to Princeton, the only people we get in would be the first 3 rows over here. Everybody else, no. So that's a pretty daunting task to get in. So it's almost like a crapshoot, because realistically, if you think about it, I'd say at least 10,000 of those 27,000 are probably perfectly qualified to go to Princeton and should get in, but Princeton has to reject 80% of them. So it's just, so don't tell your child you have to, go to Princeton specifically, because it may just not happen no matter how good they are. It is a little bit of a crapshoot, so that's just a reality check, sorry.
Well, and I want to invite Pastor Chung to come down as I go to my next question, which ties into rankings. Because, again, my parents were different once, because I'm the youngest of 3, but I remember with my oldest brother, it was, you have to go to Harvard, you have to go to Princeton, you have to go to Cornell, or we're going to kick you out of the house. That was it. It's all about the rankings. So for the parents and also the children, are college rankings the most important way to decide which schools to apply to? No. I'll answer the question, no. Pastor Chung, do you want to, and Viren alluded to it, 50% of Asian American kids that are enrolled in college are actually enrolled in community and technical schools. We do have information from Georgia Perimeter College, by the way, outside at the reception, but the realities are most of us are not going to Ivy Leagues. Most of us are going to local schools. And Pastor Chung, having worked with youth for 12 years, do you want to share a story about your experiences?
You know, one of the things that I spent a lot of time, in the past 12 years, I was working in California as a college pastor. And one of the things that, for immigrant families, one of the things that is tough is financial struggles. And, can I hear?
It's on mute. It's on mute.
You know, sorry about that. As a college pastor in California, in Los Angeles, many of our families struggle financially. And so what we found is, although in an Asian community, to think that you wouldn't go to UCLA, or even to UC Irvine, UC Santa Barbara, but to go to Pasadena City College was looked down upon. But as times changed, people found that going to a community college and getting your general education classes out of the way was cost effective. And I personally, I thought it was a good stewardship of your finances to go and to take 2 years to study, do your best, and then for us, our church was right across the street from Pasadena City College. So we got a lot of students from there, and a lot of them who went to that school, they worked hard, and then they went right into UCLA. They went right into Cal Berkeley. And so, and one of the things from my own experience too is, I went to a large university, a four-year institution, but I found that me personally, I didn't do well in a large class setting. I would sit in classes of 300-400 students, and I found that I'd just get lost, and it was easy, and I had a hard time studying. But when I transferred to a small liberal arts school, and I was in a class of 20 students, I found that there was a better accountability for me as a student, personally. It's not for everybody, but I think I want to encourage our parents to know your children. Because everyone learns differently, and they can learn in different settings. And so learning at a small liberal arts school versus a large four-year institution, large university can make a difference in how well your student, or how well your child excels academically, and also being a well-rounded person in their college environment as well.
Thank you, Pastor John. And you know, I'll say, being Korean, I will say this, I heard in Korea, it's all about getting into the college, and the name of the college. Once you're there, it doesn't matter what you do. But America is very different. I mean, you can get to a great college, but if you flunk out of that college, guess what? Your first employer, they're going to look at your grades, and they're not going to be impressed. And so let me ask this question before I ask. So we're going to ask about financial aid. Somebody asked about this, and finances is obviously important. But maybe, you know, Donna or Rodney, what other things, when you guys are beginning to start applying for colleges, and Pastor John really highlighted, what are other things that people should be researching to figure out what schools might be good for them to apply to? Anyone can answer.
Well, I know that a lot of students and families should be looking at the location and, again, the size of the campus, but location is really important, and it ties in with your finances. I know that some of the students who choose Emory, and let's say that their family is in New York, or even like Washington State, and during the semester fall break and spring breaks, a lot of students who are wealthy are able to fly back and forth very easily. But then if you are a family of, you know, not such high means, then it means that your student will stay during those breaks, and they can't go home for Thanksgiving, they can't, you know, go home for any little birthdays or those kinds of celebrations. And so it really is important because airfare is quite expensive. And so if your child does go to the the school far away, then you have to factor that in. And the financial aid will not pay or, take that into account to give you transportation for, several times during the year. So that's important. And then to really, again, research the campuses to make sure that it offers the program that you're looking for. For instance, Emory doesn't offer engineering, and a lot of students come, there is a program where you can then go to Georgia Tech to take some classes there. But if you really have a specialty, then make sure that that university college offers that and has, really, key faculty, people who are well known for their research in those areas, because then you can really excel and learn so much from the faculty.
If I can add to what she just said, and this is a real life incident that happened just a month ago on Georgia Tech campus, which certainly opened my eyes to the fact of a variable called comfort. We just look at grades, we just look at ranking, we don't look at the comfort factor that our children would prefer to have at college campuses. Even while I was driving here, I was having a conversation with Hollis, and she mentioned that a couple other students whose I-20s were rejected from some name brand colleges now have found home in Kennesaw, only because they find themselves more amenable to the crowd that is already attending. The case I want to point to you is of a student. I did not know that family. We got an early morning call from India saying, asking us to support parents of this young fellow who had just turned 22 and had committed suicide hanging over the shower curtain rod. Bright student, about to graduate in May, had 2 jobs lined up. But again, you talk about mental health and you talk about managing success or managing the pressure. When you come about institutions that you had to work really hard, had to really slog all the time, you may want to consider whether, and nobody would know your child better than you, so you may want to consider what environment is most suitable for your child. This is a personal case, as I said. Imagine the parents who had to take a flight from India being called by APD saying, please come and collect the remains of your child. That's the worst news that parents can get overseas. I don't want to belabor this subject because it's a private conversation for that family, but I want to use that as an example of things that we don't consider normally when we are thinking of applying to universities. And I think it's, again, a holistic approach on part of our parents to say, what are you looking for besides ranking, besides grades? You want to look at the comfort life, you want to look at the sociability on campus.
I also would like to urge parents to please listen to their children about what the children themselves want. Like what Emily and Rodney were talking about, their passion is what's going to get them through. So if they want to study, art instead of mathematics, if they want to study mathematics instead of art, listen to what they want, because they are not going to do as well if they aren't doing something that they enjoy. I know my parents, were definitely pushing me to go to different schools and to do different things. I've always been absurdly confident, and I always just said, I'm going to do what I want to do. But my sister was not like me. My older sister got a degree in what my mother told her to get a degree in and all these things. And she's always told me that she wishes that she didn't do that she wishes she had stood up for herself. And my sister graduated magna cum laude from UGA, and she's a highly intelligent, wonderful worker, but she doesn't like her degree, and now she's not working in that field at all. So I urge you to listen to your children and let them tell you what they want, and choose colleges based on that.
That's a good segue, and I want to share my own little story. I applied and got into both Georgia Tech and Rice, and I am awful at math, but for some reason I applied to Georgia Tech because my brothers went to Georgia Tech. There's absolutely nothing, at least for me, I ended up getting a degree in English and art and history. I did not want to do math. And Rice is a good engineering school too, but me wanting to really study the arts, why in the world am I applying to Georgia Tech? No offense to Georgia Tech. So, you might want to think about that too, even if this is in the top 10 school, is your child interested in engineering? Are they interested in art? Are they interested? That should be more of the factors, I think the overall factors. But, you know, Masa, can you come up? And while she comes up, we've had a couple of questions here which really ties into kind of our next broad topic. And some of the speakers have touched upon it, which are the challenges and struggles of our youth, which directly impacts your ability, obviously, to succeed in high school, which impacts your ability to succeed in college. One person says, the model minority stereotype works against students who are average, struggle, or who have learning disabilities. Another person asked, you know, once in college, in what ways do Asians in particular struggle, and how can they be ready for those challenges while in middle or high school? I'm going to be honest, and we have a lot of information also in Korean, translated into Korean, Chinese, Vietnamese, on a couple of different topics. Bullying, which is kind of connected to mental health, is a huge issue. Parents, I want you to understand, your Asian kids are being bullied more in the classroom than any other race group. And they're being more frequently cyberbullied, meaning through text and Facebook, than any other race group. And that creates a lot of fear of safety in the schools and often leads to absenteeism. That's one of the struggles. And Masa, would you be willing to come up and share a story about your son? Masa is an attorney, and she's one of our board members. And she has teenage children, one of whom's now at Georgia State, but they went to Northview, right? I'm sorry, she's off.
I have 3 children, a boy and girl, and my eldest son, well, thankfully he went to Georgia State. I don't know if he's going to graduate or not. And my advice to him is the opposite of what you're telling me. And I think he got in because he didn't listen to me. I'm a typical Asian mother, and I was raised in Japan, and grade was everything. They don't care about volunteers activities, and there was none actually. And what my son told me, he wasn't getting good grades, and he told me that he has to go to volunteer activities on the weekend. Mom, can you drive me? And I said, no. And what's that? And then he had horrible grades. I told him, no, you have to study harder. You have to get better grades. He said, no, I'm not going to do that. And I'm going to take AP. I said, oh, you're going to fail if you take AP. And he said, no, that's going to impress the college examiners. And that's what you were telling me. And I said everything opposite of what they were saying. And he didn't listen to me. Mom, you don't know. This is America. This is not Japan. He got in with horrible grades. I'm not saying that you can neglect your grades, but he got in by not listening to me. And then I knew one of my clients' daughter who had a 4.0 did not get into the same college. So I was thinking, 4.0 doesn't get in. My son had horrible grades. I don't even want to talk about it. He got in. But in order to get there, we had to struggle because I was born in Japan, but I was raised in Canada, and I had to immigrate back to Japan, and I faced discrimination myself when I went back to Japan because I looked Japanese, I didn't speak Japanese. My gestures were different, so we were treated differently. I went through that process myself, so I thought I understood what my children were going through. But this is a little bit different because we're in a diverse country. Starting with my eldest son, he came in and once he knew a little bit of English because I took him to Canada when he was in elementary school. When he came here, first year he got into a lot of trouble at school. So I told him what's going on. And then there's bully kids who would pick on him. And the bully kids are, it's like criminals. They do bully you. They bully you when the teachers are not watching you. And then my son would react and he would get in trouble. So I asked him, well, why is he getting into trouble? He tells me, well, that boy is taking my pen and throwing this at me. And I told the teacher. And then the teacher gets mad at him and he gets time off. And I told him one time, okay, he is doing this when no one's looking. You're speaking out when teacher is teaching. Do the opposite. Get attention, get evidence, get witness. And that's how she did it. So whenever he speaks out, or whenever someone's doing, he tries to get his friends to look at what's going on. And that's how he dealt with the situation. My second son, this was a struggle. And this is in another county, it's not here in Northview. We moved to Northview after. When we were in DeKalb County school system, my second one was a problem. For 2 years, those of you who came from another country, you go to ESL class first, right? And then you go for like 2 years. 2 years you're fine because you're taken out of class, you go to ESL class, you're learning English, so everyone knows your English is limited. The problem is the third year, you're taken out of ESL class, you're treated like everyone else. And all of a sudden in the 4th grade, you learn about the Constitution. And they don't understand, and you have absolutely no help. And then several years ago, George Bush passed a law called No Child Left Behind. That was supposed to help the children. The teachers were supposed to help the children to achieve their goal. In reality, what was happening in the school that we used to go is that parents are called upon a meeting and they say, well, your child is not achieving this or that. We propose that he be held back. Or they would say, I would tell you what you can help your children at home. Your parents can do this, parents could do that. So every day after work, I had to stay up until 2 o'clock at midnight. I have to, on weekends, I had to review the social study work. I had to review science. I hate science. I had to review everything, make note cards for my children, and teach them every day after work until 2 o'clock and my child is sleeping. And that's how I had to deal with the situation. So one time I told the teacher, I told the vice principal of the school, because the teachers won't listen to me, I said, no child left behind is supposed to ask the school to help the students. The school is telling us how the parents can help the students or just to hold them back. And I did not know at that time that in Georgia's school system, if you're 18 or over, you cannot continue in the regular school system. So if I did listen to the school, my son would not graduate because he's already 18 years old and he'll have to go to a private school. They don't even care about that. And they just hold it back because, and then their grade is okay. As a teacher, they didn't make a bad grade because they just held the child back. So that was the situation we had to deal with. And at one time, and bully kids would bully him. Teachers would ignore. And at one point, my son got angry and he started rebelling against the teachers. And that was the rebellious stage, grade 4 and 5. He got in so much trouble from the teachers. It wasn't until the social worker got involved that the social worker called me, what's going on? And I told him, well, there's a bully kid that was suspended from school for 1 semester. He came back. He's staying during class. He's throwing his pencil on the floor. He's doing things teacher ignores. So my son totally thought all teachers are unfair. They're the bad guys. So that's how he started fighting against the teachers. Luckily, we had this wonderful vice principal who came into our school system. And as an Asian parent, I think if the teacher calls me for trouble, if there's trouble, I thought, okay, my child's doing something wrong. That's where I go, okay, what did you do? You didn't listen in class. Were you paying attention? And then it wasn't until I really talked with the teachers that I realized something's wrong. Something's wrong. And when I emailed the teachers, this particular teacher would not respond to me. Once, twice, 3 times, won't respond. So after the vice principal came, I started CCing the vice principal. Bam, immediate response. So you really need to know your teachers. Like bullying doesn't just come from the students. Sometimes the teachers are bullying as well. And I didn't believe my ears what I was hearing when my children went to middle school in a certain DeKalb County school. They were saying, so-and-so teacher hates Asian kids. I was like, what? No, you're just joking. And then I didn't even deal with that comment. And then I heard the same, his friend saying the same thing. Oh yeah, that teacher, he hates Asians or he hates blacks. I didn't believe myself. And then a year later, that teacher got terminated. And then I thought, okay, maybe it's true. So I started talking to my children's friend, what do you think about so-and-so teacher? And then it wasn't until one day I went to School Box, where they sell students textbook, not textbook, but study guides. And then there was this chemistry teacher that my son was talking about. It's she's very rude. So she hated my son, that according to my son. I went up to her and said, "Hello, Miss So-and-so. I heard that you're my son's chemistry teacher." And she was like, "Yeah. How's he doing in class?" Totally avoiding conversation with me. She didn't like him. And several years later, I went to the same school. Now my daughter was in her class. And she was very nice. She loved my daughter. So I think there's some issue with my children as well, but I could see how the teacher would deal with this situation. And just to go back to my son, one time my eldest one is a very strong son. He won't complain. Well, he may complain, but he will stick strong. He will stand very strong against whatever discrimination that's against him. In a music class, he was the only boy, and this teacher was very, very, I won't say strict, but he would yell at students, and he was just doing so many things that I thought was unprofessional. But my comment was, just get out of that class. I don't want to deal with that teacher. I don't want to even go to school. I don't want to talk to the principal. But he stuck in that class. And then one time there was a concert, and he went in this suit, but we didn't have a bow tie. So I thought a necktie was okay. He went in with a necktie, and then in front of all of this audience, the teacher yelled at him, saying, "You're not wearing a bow tie, you get out of here." In front of all the parents' audience, he came out crying. I was trying to find a parking lot. He came out crying. So I thought, okay, I have to do something. He is not a boy who cries. Even if he gets in a fight, he will not cry. So one time, and then I contacted the principal, who told me that teacher was in trouble so many times with the PTA. But the school wanted to keep him because he was an excellent music teacher. So I said, okay, then I would like to have a meeting with the teacher, with the vice principal. And I started out as a humble, nice, very quiet Asian mother. So I sat there, but little did they know that I already contacted the Board of Education, and I already talked to them about the regulations in this county, and I knew what I was going to do. If they did not listen to me, I was going to go to the next step. They did not know that. So I started out very humble, quiet, just to see their reaction. And how they reacted, he was like Hitler. He was very arrogant, and for the first, that was my wake-up call. If your child is complaining, you really have to listen to them. And what amazed me more is that how the vice principal reacted. He was totally on that teacher's side. I said, no, we don't do that. Your child probably is not listening or something like that. So after 5 minutes of talk, I thought, okay, no more nice Asian mom, American style. So at that point, I said, okay, here. And I had all these papers on my lap, so probably they were wondering, what are those papers she's holding? And I said, okay, here is a 15-year-old child going to the concert. He comes out crying, and he's shaking. He can't even talk. What happened? You're saying it was his mistake. He said that you yelled at him. And I went on with examples. And then that Hitler teacher all of a sudden changed into a little sheep. He said, no, ma'am. Yes, ma'am. No, it was a misunderstanding. And he just totally changed. And at last, we weren't trying to make a fight or anything. Like in our culture, we try to avoid confrontation. We try to avoid trouble. So we're not asking for anything, but I was just two things. My son only wants an apology, that's it. We're not asking for anything now, we're not going to the media. And second thing, I heard that this counts like 20% of the grade. What are you going to do about it? I said, oh, you don't have to worry about that. We take care of that. And he asked, okay, you can ask your son to come in, and he apologized. But that was a wake-up call. Like, if your child is complaining, you have to listen to them. And with my second son, too, when he was rebelling, like going back to my second son's story, whenever there was a problem, I said, I'll go talk to the teacher. And then my son stopped talking to me what happened, because in their mind, going to the teacher is not the solution, because the teachers are biased. That's what he thought. So he stopped talking to me until they got in really big trouble. And for 2 years, he would fight against students, he would fight against teachers, he would yell at teachers. That continued for about 2 years. And later on, we moved to this Suwannee district, North Fulton, and now we're in North Bahama. Before that, we went to another middle school. That was a cultural difference because we moved from a mainly African American district to a mostly Asian district. So we have a very different culture. So there was a cultural adjustment for the first year. But now he has calmed down, and luckily we have very nice teachers in Northview High School and in the middle school. So he has calmed down. Now he has a different mentality. He thought all teachers are biased. Now there's biased teachers and non-biased teachers. And even with terrible teachers, he learned the skills, how to cope with these teachers. So he starts out in a bad term, and after 1 year, he knows how to make the teacher like him. So he did learn all those skills. And lastly, just about my daughter. She is the good girl. My 2 boys are really, really rough, like very wild. But she thought she was the good girl all the time. And she thought, I'm different from my brothers. I would never get into a fight. I'm the good girl. When she was in maybe the 5th grade or 6th grade, I got a call from the principal saying that she would be suspended for 1 day. I'm like, what, my daughter? I didn't believe that. And she got in a fight with a boy who was really suspended for, I don't know how many days, but that was a trouble bully boy, known as the bully boy in the class. And no one did anything about him. The teachers know that that boy is bullying all the kids. The teacher would just ignore that. One time my daughter and her friends were in a group. They were doing some study group stuff. And the boy just throws her textbook on the floor, pokes on her, and does everything annoying. So my daughter she just flew, and she scratched him in the face. And then he just cried. And I got a call from the vice president. And the call was kind of weird because she's telling me that my daughter's going to be suspended for 1 day, but she was very apologetic. She said, yeah, but that your daughter is only suspended because her fingernails were too sharp and the other boy was bleeding. So we had to suspend her because that's the school rule. If there's blood, she has to be suspended. And my daughter comes home and she's so worried that I'm going to be mad at her. And she's like, Mom, don't let it do it. I'm sorry. And she's crying, right? And I didn't, but I heard what she told me and I thought, oh, if I were her, I may have done the same thing. So I didn't really get mad at her under that situation. But I just told her, this is America, the law is very strict. It's not like Japan or China, so you can't do this. And then that night, I get a call from a parent. In our school, in that class, we always had like a parent who would watch over the kids or help the teacher. And she called me and said, Miss Okura, I heard what happened in class today, and actually I was there, I saw her. Thank you very much. Please say thank you to your daughter, because I was in class, the teacher doesn't do anything. I could not do anything. No student stood up against that child. Karen was the first one who stood against that child. Thank you very much. If she gets in trouble, all of us are behind her. We're going to support you. That's what she said. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Masa. I'm going to ask one question over to Jennifer Falk, and then we will quickly go over some of the questions people have asked. And when I ask each question, maybe one person, quick answer so we can get through it. And just remember, when we're done at 8:30, please drop off your surveys, get a free raffle ticket, go to the gym right next door. We have some refreshments, coffee, a little bit of cookies, free information. We have developed a sheet of scholarship information, specifically for Asian Americans. So you definitely want to get that. And this book, which has been donated, we're going to raffle off one of these books, but we have 9 that were donated. And we'd appreciate, if you guys want to buy it, a donation of $15 to ALAC will get you this book that actually contains essays from Asian students that successfully got into Ivy League schools. So Jennifer, can you briefly, now with these stories that we've heard about bullying and mental health and different struggles that kids have in high school, how can parents navigate the public school system if their kid gets it? What are their rights?
Well, I think the first thing that I want to stress is that you do have rights. And most parents of all ethnicities and races are afraid to speak up. And they actually think that that's going to hurt their child more if they speak up. But as you just heard, and as I can testify after doing this work for over a decade in this county, if you speak up and you assert your rights, your child is more protected and will learn more than ever. So that's the first and the single most important lesson, is that you have to be an advocate for your student. There are three really important areas to focus on for parent rights. One is language access rights. The second area would be what I call public school choice transfer rights, which are covered by state law. And the third area are your rights when your child is disciplined. All three are very difficult areas to navigate, but very, very important. As far as language access goes, if you think you're missing information, if you don't feel as if you are as clued in as another parent, then you probably are not. And probably your gut is right. The school has a responsibility to provide you information in your home or native language. Any typical event that occurs for all students, a parent-teacher meeting, activities at the schools, you're covered, and it is the school's responsibility to share that with you in your language. Okay, so if there's a parent-teacher conference meeting, then you should be able to access a interpreter. If there's written material coming home about this, you should be receiving it in your native language. So that's number one. Number two, if you have a struggling learner, and if you feel that your child may be in need of special education services, then you are covered from point A, evaluation, all the way through to discipline in having an interpreter by your side so you understand your rights fully. Every single meeting you attend to, I go with parents, and for years in DeKalb County, certain parents were not receiving translators. All I had to do was show up and say, "Where's the translator?" And they stopped the meeting immediately. So now that's nothing to, I mean, it goes on in all counties. So if there's a reporter here, please don't just pick up DeKalb. Please. And then anything English language learner specific. So if your child is in the ESOL program, materials that come home, information, parent meetings, always should be made so you can fully understand. And then Title I covers, the language is a little less specific. It says, to the best of the school's ability, you should understand things like the student report or the school report card, any parent contracts, any parent activities. So if you're in a Title I school, it is a little different with understanding the school overall. Schools do as good a job as they can, but you're not necessarily entitled. But the first three you are definitely entitled to. General activities, special education, and anything specific to ESOL programming. The second area that most people don't know about is your right to transfer. A couple of years ago, the state passed what they call the public school choice legislation, and that is if a school has capacity, you have the right to transfer your child into that school. The school system will not provide transportation, but in instances like you were talking about, if your child is bullied and you want to make the choice to move your child, understand that there is a piece of legislation that allows you to do that, even if the school is just not a good fit, okay? And I think it is House Bill 252, but don't quote me on that. Don't quote me on anything here. And the good thing about that piece of legislation is that your child can stay there the entire segment of their education. So if it's elementary school all the way from K up to 5, your entire middle school years, and then your entire high school years. So it does give you some protection. The last area, which is near and dear to my heart, because I helped write this book, okay? And this is the Student Code of Conduct. I didn't write the Korean version. I didn't help write the Korean version. But this is a book that comes home, and you have to understand, in discipline, parents have very few rights. Essentially, you have the right to understand what your child is being charged with. You have the right to ask questions and see evidence and get subpoenas if your child is being separated from school. But that is really the only point that a parent has rights. But the one thing you can count on during that entire process, again, since every child is disciplined, you have the right to a interpreter to help you understand all of the paperwork that comes home. And one thing I want to talk about very, very briefly is the bullying law. So bullying is rampant in the Asian communities, and you also need to understand that if a child is found in violation of bullying 3 times, then they're to be removed from the school. All right, so I've worked with both bullies and kids being bullied. It's never good to separate. It's never good to separate anyone from school. Hopefully, you find the right principles to work through these things. But I share what your story. It is one of the most difficult areas to navigate in the entire school system, which is your Student Code of Conduct. Read it, understand it. If you live in Gwinnett County, they do a good job in the handbook. Anything that's asterisk, you do need to understand that your child can be arrested or juvenile complaints. Not only can they are. So pick up the phone, seek help if you're engaged in disciplinary issues at school.
And I'd like to say we'd love to have a follow-up seminar if parents are interested about that specific thing, school discipline, how you can navigate the public schools when your kids are in trouble. And by the way, kids that are bullied often will bully back, fight back. So that they both, the bullied and the bullier, will both get suspended. And absenteeism, you keep missing school enough times, that also leads to trouble. I know Korean parents have been surprised that chronic absenteeism can lead to juvenile issues. So we'd love to talk about that in the future. All right, I'm just going to ask quick questions. I've grouped them up. Some of your questions. If I don't get to your question, some of our speakers will be in the gym afterwards, and you can talk with them directly. There were several questions about extracurricular activities, and let me just basically, like, one person is asking, is it better? Will universities choose a student that does one extracurricular activity, say orchestra, for 4 years straight, versus a student who does 2 years of art and 2 years of orchestra? And then another one says, what if I'm not good at my extracurricular activity? Should I just quit? I mean, and then Emily, somebody wanted to know what your extracurricular activities were.